us. And then he summarizes beautifully in these last couple of verses. I've trusted, and trust is the key kind of Old Testament period word for faith. You know, I have faith in thee. Trust is the key word there. And he has this trust, not in the arm of flesh. And I know that God will give to those that ask, and I will cry unto thee. I'm still keeping this relationship going. My God, the rock of my righteousness. Again, this rock.
Old Testament imagery again.
Very powerful.
Yeah. I want to point out here, too, that throughout here, this is not something that Nephi comes up with totally on his own, because he's paraphrasing here many passages in the Old Testament. He's paraphrasing from Psalm 34 and Isaiah 6, Isaiah in the 40th chapter, also from Isaiah 52.
So he knows the scriptures and is able to use those scriptural texts as his own words.
They become him.
Right.
I mean, they're his life as well.
You might think that he's just paraphrasing or quoting here, but no, these are the scriptures that have become part of him, and he's using them in this beautiful psalm.
Yes.
In new ways that apply to him. It's beautiful.
Yes.
Well, after this wonderful psalm of Nephi, we come to some sad events in chapter 5. For instance, in verse 6, Nephi is going to have to flee with his family.
And if I could just say something, I was actually taught this years ago. If you go over to verse 27, there's an interesting verse there. And it came to pass that we lived after the manner of happiness.
So they start out, there's contention, division, and strife.
Well,
they separate themselves, and they find that they can be happy.
They can still be happy, and I think the key is, some of us have been through that, where a family, the one I came from, did split that way, and that's a rough situation. That's tough. So how do you remain happy? Well, I think chapter 5 has some great answers for us.
Well, it's interesting that you compare this division to things that happened in families, because there are Old Testament motifs that are brought up here. Nephi takes his family, Zoram, Sam, Jacob, Joseph, his sisters,
and all those who would
those who hearken to the revelations,
grandchildren, great-grandchildren, even the layman, Lemuel. Yeah.
But in verse 7, they take everything and they journeyed in the wilderness for the space of many days. And sometimes we miss this journeying, this promised land imagery, which starts with the Exodus account, but we see throughout the Scriptures and throughout the Book of Mormon. And you know, our probation in this life is a wilderness. Mm-hmm. And the promised land we're heading for is our heavenly home. And so we see them going through the steps, as you say, to live after the manner of happiness, which we would say live according to the plan of happiness. Mm-hmm. They separate themselves, just like the children of Israel went out of Egypt, and we are counseled, challenged to go out from Babylon. We go through this life, and we are trying to live in a heavenly way.
And the next thing that he mentions after this departure into the journey in the wilderness and settling down in verse 10 is that they did observe to keep the judgments and the statutes and the commandments of the Lord in all things according to the law of Moses. This has to tie in with what you're talking about, Stan, about the living after the manner of happiness.
Yeah. And for them it was the Mosaic law. Right. So that means the offerings and sacrifices, which is why later on here they build a temple, because they need to have that to perform these required Mosaic sacrifices. That means the religious calendar and other things that we attribute to the law of Moses, they're still living this. They will all the way through until the Savior actually appears.
In verse 11, as a result of this, the Lord is with us, and we did prosper exceedingly. And so we see a fulfillment of the positive side of that Lehi covenant that we saw in chapter 4, verse 4. If you hearken the commandments, you'll prosper. If you don't, you will not prosper. We didn't say it at the time, but I think one thing that's really important is it always says ye. It's plural in King James English. This covenant about prospering, of course, when we're righteous, we prosper spiritually, but sometimes people apply that too far. A lot of times we see kind of a corporate covenant, a group covenant. As a people, if they are faithful, they are prospered.
We as a people will prosper, that our society will prosper.
But some individual righteous people may prosper spiritually, but not prosper temporally.
Or with health.
Right, and that's an important thing to point out.
To have those kind of issues, yes.
Paul, one just quick thing. There's three things that happen here that go throughout the book. he's their ruler, and they don't like that.
Laman
and Lemuel.
Even though the angel has told them back there.
And Father Lehi has told them,
Yeah,
follow him.
The Nephi is going to be their ruler, yes.
And 5, they depart into the wilderness.
Yes.
And the Lamanites hold this against them. You go over to Mosiah 10, it gives you all 3 of these. Verse 12, and you stole the record from us. And this goes on for hundreds of years, those 3 traditions. You departed. We didn't leave you. You left us.
Robbed us.
And you robbed us. And you took the ruling from our hands. And it goes on forever.
It sets the stage for the things that go on in the rest of the book of Mormon. We can't leave this chapter without talking about verses 20, 21, and 22, when the curse comes upon Laman and Lemuel's posterity. And I think it's important to discuss exactly what this was very quickly. First of all, the cause of it. Verse 21. The cursing to come upon them, yea, even a sore cursing, because of their iniquity. So the curse comes because of iniquity. And then we get what the curse really was in the end of verse 20.
Yeah, it's being cut off from the presence of the Lord. They are not spiritually alive.
They're cut off from priesthood direction, from priesthood help, and that all the things that go along with being faithful in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then comes the sign of the curse at the end of 21. Vic, you know a lot about that.
Well, he tells them at the end here that whereas they had been white in the middle and exceedingly fair and delightsome, that they might not be enticing into my people, the Lord did cause a skin of blackness to come upon them. I cross-reference this to an earlier passage, 1 Nephi 12:23. It's not in the footnotes here, but this is where Nephi summarizes the same set of events here. 1 Nephi 12:23, and it came to pass that I beheld that after they had dwindled in unbelief, he's talking about the descendants of Laman and Lemuel, they became a dark, is the word he uses there, and loathsome, and a filthy people, full of idleness and all manner of abominations.
I think the important thing to stress, though, is, the idleness, the abominations, it's the behavior, and it's what these things symbolize about their spiritual nature that's more important than anything
It comes because
cosmetic.
of their unbelief and iniquity.
Now, we're fast drawing to a close here, and Eric, I've asked you to make a short summary now of what we've been discussing today.
Well, as you said at the outset, these 2 chapters, 2 Nephi 4 and 5, provide an important bridge between the Lehi era and the early history of the Book of Mormon and what comes afterwards. We see here the division between the people of God, we call them the Nephites generally, and those who reject the word of the Lord, the Lamanites. And we see here that when Nephi separates, when the people live according to the judgments and the statutes, when they build a temple, it doesn't have to be expensive, but it's the best workmanship they can come up with, when they follow the Lord, when they have priesthood leaders, in verse 26 of chapter 5, we didn't get to this, but Jacob and Joseph are established. When they have all those things, they prosper as a group. And the Lamanites, sadly, at this point in their history, because of their iniquity, they have been cut off from the Lord. And there happens to be a sign at this period in history to keep them from mixing with the Nephites and drawing them astray. But we've got wonderful poetic expressions by Nephi, as we read in the Psalm of Nephi, which serve as such wonderful models for us. So both Nephi as a person and the Nephites as a people both serve for models for us today on how we can live, how we can deal with problems, how we can be faithful to the Lord.
This is a wonderful section that leads into the rest of the Book of Mormon, and it's going to talk about living after the manner of happiness. It's great to be with you, brethren. Thank you.